Good morning. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on March 8th, the committee will begin its study on the federal government's initiative to resettle Syrian refugees. Appearing before us today is the Minister, as well as senior department officials. Welcome back, Minister. It doesn't seem as if a week would be complete if you weren't before our committee. And we'll begin with your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm delighted to be here again. It's not as if I've been lobbying to make frequent appearances. I think I have been invited, so it is a pleasure to be here once again. And this is about the settlement process. And just to start, I'll have a few remarks. Je suis heureux de comparaître à nouveau.
I am pleased to be here once again to appear before you today. I want to review various aspects of refugee settlement from the recent past to the short-term future. I will focus in large part on Canada's efforts to assist people fleeing instability in Syria, looking both at what we have done and at what we continue to do. After my few words, I will be happy to answer questions.
Canada fulfilled its mandate to welcome 25,000 Syrian refugees by the end of February. We're now working on our second commitment, which is to welcome 25,000 government-assisted Syrian refugees by the end of 2016. We've already brought more than 17,300 to Canada, and we are working to welcome the remaining part of this group by December 31st, 2016. Also, my department will make every effort to finalize the processing of the privately sponsored Syrian refugee applications that we received before March 31st, 2016. By the end of this year or early in 2017, we already have a number of additional officials in the field in Jordan or Beirut, Lebanon, and more will be there. This plan will come out in more detail in a short while, but it has already started, and there are additional officials out there as of today. The government is prepared to invest up to $678 million across departments over 6 years to help the Syrian refugees accepted by our country settle here and become integrated in Canadian society. This should underline that Canada's response to the refugee crisis that has touched so many countries around the world will continue to be done in a sustainable way. Budget 2016 allotted $245 million in funding over 5 years to our department, starting in 2016-17, for the identification, overseas processing, transportation, and resettlement of the additional government-assisted Syrian refugees. To call the response to our Welcome Refugees initiative unprecedented would not be a stretch, even for a country such as our own, with a history of helping many of the world's dispossessed. What we have seen since last November is a tremendous outpouring of support which continues to this day. Indeed, one could say that the strength of the support is a problem for me, a challenge for me, because as I've said before, I'm probably the only immigration minister in the world whose major challenge is not being able to deliver enough refugees quickly enough to satisfy the amazing generosity of Canadian households, Canadian families who want to sponsor them. So this is a good problem to have in the sense that it underlines the welcoming nature of our people, but it's still a problem. And as I said just a few minutes ago, we have started to deploy additional people into the region in order to expedite those refugees as quickly as we can. The Red Cross welcomed flights of Syrian refugees as they came to Canada. The tireless hours their representatives put in at the Welcome Center was quite amazing, And as we all know, the Red Cross has once again shown its amazing capacity in the case of the Fort McMurray crisis. Also, Community Foundations of Canada created the Welcome Fund, and they are working with Corporate Canada to help provide affordable housing to refugees. At the height of the operation, we had approximately 500 government officials, including visa officers and military staff, deployed to work on the Syrian resettlement effort abroad, and hundreds more dedicated full-time to Operation Syrian Refugees in Canada. So I don't think I can say too much to salute the officials of my department and other departments who carried out this amazing operation in Syria and in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey over 4 months to bring the 25,000 refugees. So I do think that was an amazing effort and probably without precedent. As I've said many times, Syrian refugee support came not only from individuals and small groups, but from the private sectors, private sponsors, municipal, provincial, and territorial governments, and the all-important settlement provider organizations. So it was, in truth, a major national project. So where do things stand now, and how does refugee settlement look going forward? This is expected to be the most ambitious resettlement year in Canadian history, as we work to welcome more than 44,000 refugees. The government has tripled the number of privately sponsored refugees to be settled, about 40% of this year's total of refugee arrivals. Let me point out that this refers to all refugees, not only those from Syria, and I want to re-emphasize that we have not lost sight, despite the recent attention paid to Syrian newcomers, of other refugees who also need our protection. L'expérience syrienne nous a donné de bonnes leçons. Nous avons récemment
The Syrian experience taught us quite a bit. We recently completed several lessons learned sessions so that we could capture best practices and apply that knowledge to other immigration processing streams. It's true, we have reached a significant milestone. We will report on how we did this fall.
Government and its partners face continuing challenges and opportunities associated with integration and helping refugees succeed. So at this point, I want to comment a little bit on this question of integration challenges. With the continuing arrival of large numbers of refugees, settlement services to help newcomers find their place in Canada will play a vital role. In 2016-17, the government is allocating $38.6 million in additional funding to respond to the needs of Syrian refugees who will need resettlement services to help them successfully integrate into Canadian society. Securing permanent housing for Syrian refugees remains a key priority. As of today, my text says 97%, I'm told it's now 98%. 98% of government-assisted Syrian refugees had moved into permanent housing. So some time ago, in I think last November, when asked what the priorities were, I said the top 3 priorities were housing, housing, and housing, because at that point I thought that would be a major challenge. Well, it was a major challenge, but it's largely mission accomplished now. 98% is almost 100%. And so I think, thanks in part to the support from the private sector in this area and for other reasons, we have largely reached our goal in terms of finding permanent housing for the refugees. But of course, the work is by no means done because there are areas of language training, finding jobs, and other things which are far from complete. But at least on the housing front, I think we can claim, well, not 100% success. We can claim 98% success as of today. Local service provider organizations across Canada are working as quickly as possible to secure necessary and appropriate housing for government-assisted refugees, no matter where they are from, Syria or elsewhere. Once they are here, refugees have access to our full suite of programs, and these include the following: language assessment and training. As of March 10th, 2016, more than 4,000 refugees had been assessed for knowledge of English or French, and over 1,500 had begun language training. Support to build networks in communities, for example, between newcomers and community members, public institutions, and employers. In 35 social innovation pilots, over 2,000 refugees across the country have participated in such varied activities as cooking exchanges and sessions on mental health, improving computer literacy, developing peer connections with Canadian youth, and networking with employers. Information, orientation, and help finding and retaining employment, including one-on-one counseling, job search workshops, resume and interview help, Canadian workplace orientation, mentoring partnerships, networking, and job bridging programs. These are all among the things that are currently underway. So I think I will leave it at that, Mr. Chair. That gives some idea of where we are at in terms of settling the refugees, and I would be most happy to receive any questions.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Tabarra, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister, for being here, and thank you for the department staff. Minister, in Waterloo Region, we have welcomed over 1,200 Syrian refugees since last year. Our region punches above its weight. We're only 1.6% of Canada's population, but we've taken in 4.6% of all Syrian refugees' arrival in Canada and have settled in our region fairly well right now. I'm advised by our region's immigration partnership that some of the factors which played a role in our region initial resettlement success include the government's immediate assistance of permanent residency documents and social insurance numbers and enrollment in the interim federal health program at the port of arrival, as well as the elimination of interest-bearing loans to cover the cost of travel to Canada and overseas and medical assessments. So our region has done a fantastic job of settling Syrian refugees. There's been lots of individuals, organizations, fundraisers to welcoming all these Syrian refugees. But I keep getting questions in my constituency that some constituents have approached me with concerns that our attention to the Syrian crisis is diverting resources and attention away from important efforts like family reunification, settlement of other refugees from different countries. And I've explained to them that this is a big humanitarian crisis that we haven't seen in many years. But can you provide us with some reassurances?
Yes. Well, first of all, I praised the performance of my department in admitting all the refugees, but neglected to introduce once again the three at the table with me. So I should do that. Katrina Tapley, Don Edlund, and David Manicombe have been key to this operation and may be called upon to answer some of your questions today. And Kitchener, yes, has done extremely well. I'm told housing, you're at 96%, so just about all there. And in terms of the impact of the Syrian refugee operation on other categories of immigration, which I think was your question, on the one hand, I make no apology for the government giving priority to Syria, because this was the worst refugee crisis the world has seen in decades. There were literally millions of people displaced. It's almost can be seen to be an existential crisis for the European Union. It has created a crisis there, also in many places around the world. And I think the fact that we stepped up as we did to put major effort and resources into this at a time when much of the world was hesitating or even closing their doors was the right thing to do. Now, when you do something like that, it is going to have some implications for other things, because in focusing so much on this, you are necessarily taking some resources away from other things. So I did check out early in my time as minister as to whether, As to whether this was diverting resources away from dealing with other refugees, and I was told several times that no, the people working on the other refugees were still doing that, so service to them was not diminished. That's not to say it was necessarily good, but it wasn't made worse by the Syrian effort. And we, along with many other challenges we have, is to improve our speed of delivery for refugees from countries other than Syria, but I don't think it was impacted negatively by the Syrian operation.
Mr. Chair, I didn't mention, but I wanted to split my time with Mr. Sarai.
Thank you. Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Minister, and your staff for coming in. I wanted to know first just a quick factoid. In Surrey, what's the percentage of Syrian refugees that have received permanent housing?
Maybe one of my colleagues will know. I'm sure it's over 90%. Do we have an exact number?
I have the number for Vancouver proper, which includes all the folks for Surrey, and that's at 97%.
Oh, good. Okay. Do we have data on the percentage of families who have found employment out of the Syrian refugees? Are we noticing that they're starting to get employment, or is that still in the infancy stage?
Actually, that's a good question, and the short answer to that is no. We don't have a precise number for what percentage of refugees are in employment, the way we have a precise number for what proportion has permanent housing. We're working to get those numbers from the settlement organizations. We do not have that number right now. We certainly have been working very hard with industry groups, and I've been speaking to industry groups going across the country to encourage employers to step up to the plate and hire Syrian refugees, and I know a good number have been hired. I cannot give you the precise number. Maybe one of the officials has something more concrete in this area.
Minister, to pick up from where you are, it's really how we will track those who've moved on to employment. Yeah. And so we'll do it through three different ways. One is we have something called the Immigration Contribution Agreement Reporting System. We call it ICARE. So this works with service provider organizations, and they enter information into it. So we're building that part so we can track properly. And on top of that, we'll have a settlement client outcomes survey later this year. That'll give us an even better picture. And of course, we'll use a longitudinal immigration database. And on top of that, I might mention that we recognized employer excellence in terms of employer awards for refugee employment earlier this year. And we had 3 winners across the country. And just as an illustrative example, Cinnarol Bakeries Limited out of Calgary, in terms of what they're able to provide for support, transportation support, flexible work schedules, social activities for employers to build networks. And so they were one of 3 winners that were there.
Thank you.
And maybe just in response to the previous question, I might point out, in terms of the impact of Syrian refugees, it cannot be said that this was at the cost of family reunification, because our levels numbered for family reunification are higher this year than last year. They're 80,000 versus 68,000 the previous year. So we have also put a push on for family reunification, especially spousal.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Ms. Rumpel, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. My question is to department officials. Can you please provide the committee with the total cost to the federal government to date of this government's Syrian refugee initiative?
So just give me a moment, Mr. Chair, to find that. I have our departmental costs, which were part of the mains that we saw earlier this week. So the funding was $298 million, and in 15-16, and we spent 187.4.
All government departments?
That's just for IRCC. So
do you have an idea of across government departments what the total figure is?
We've started to get that cost coming in, Mr. Chair, and we're just finalizing that, because at the end of the fiscal year, at the end of March, there's still some expenses that come in relating to that fiscal year that we're still tagging. But it's in the realm of $141, $142 million for all departments.
Do you have an estimate over a 5-year period of what the total cost to the federal government of the Syrian Refugee Initiative will be?
We had the initial amount of money allocated for the Government of Canada to deliver on this project, which I believe was $687 million, maybe 678. I'm sorry if I'm mixing the numbers up backwards. And we would be working on then projecting forward what the costs are in future years.
I notice in SUP Estimates A that there's an additional roughly $150 million allocated to the Syrian Refugee Initiative. Is this above and beyond the figures that you just provided to the committee?
Yes, that is. So that's money that's for 16-17, and that's for processing and bringing to Canada the remainder of the government-sponsored refugees that are part of the government's 25,000 commitment by the end of December.
So if we were to ballpark the total cost over a 5-year period of time, we're probably north of $1 billion at this point?
I would hesitate to try and do the math that quickly, Mr. Chair.
But it's significantly above $250 million, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. My next question relates to the minister's comments around prioritizing Syrian refugees, with, of course, the context that we all agree that this is a humanitarian crisis of epic magnitude. But to department officials, has the government provided any formal clarification or listing of criteria for prioritization of refugee groups from one region versus another?
Just can I interrupt for a second? In answer to your question, north of $1 billion, I think Mr. Manicombe has a response.
There's additional money this year of $150 million. The costs identified before that, I believe, were about $680 million. So I do not believe that that represents a total of over $1 billion.
What's a $250 million between friends? Going back to my question that I just asked to the department officials, has the government provided any additional criteria or any clarity around the criteria for prioritization of one refugee group over another?
We work with UNHCR on a multi-year basis all around the world to identify, in coordination with other resettlement countries, particularly the United States and Australia, groups that the United Nations High Commission for Refugees is flagging as priorities for resettlement. And then the resettlement countries work with the UNHCR to decide which country is best placed in which region to absorb which elements of the population. We have a number of multi-year commitments in South America, in Central Africa, in Asia, to resettle populations in coordination with UNHCR. And we are meeting all of those multi-year commitments that we had made prior to the Syrian effort. And we continue to accept referrals on an ongoing basis in those areas consistent with that plan.
Some groups from other that are trying to sponsor refugees from other parts of the world in Canada, there's been media reports that they've experienced delays due to the Syrian Refugee Initiative. We anticipate putting order paper questions on this down the road. So have there been any delays or any verbal notices given to these groups by officials within Citizenship and Immigration that their applications would not be prioritized or would not be expedited at the same level as Syrian refugees?
The answer to that is a bit complicated. The privately sponsored refugee program in the past had widely varying processing times depending on the part of the world where the refugees were from, primarily based on existing case inventories and processing resources and whether or not we were able to put staff safely into some parts of the world and things like that. We have not reduced any refugee processing elsewhere in the world due to the Syrian initiative, so there's been no displacement. That said, the priority on the Syrian project has meant that Syrian privately sponsored refugees are being processed more quickly than some refugees in other parts of the world. This year, because of the tripling of the privately sponsored refugee program, we are planning to process more privately sponsored refugees from elsewhere in the world than was the case in the previous several years, in addition to the Syrian commitment.
We also have noted there's been multiple media stories from around the country that there's been a very high demand on food bank usage for government-sponsored refugees, 400 people in the Ottawa area alone. has the government given any thought to how they're dealing with food bank usage, especially in other areas of the country where there might be demand on them at this point in time?
Mr. Chair, we are working with the Canadian Food Banks Association to study this phenomenon. We need to recognize that government-assisted refugees, when they come to Canada, and the income support they receive puts them into a low-income setup. And so it's not unusual that government-assisted refugees would be accessing food banks. But we have been working with our service provider organizations to try and understand the phenomenon as well. And so in some instances, it's possibly a temporary phenomenon as people are waiting for their child tax benefit credit checks to arrive. In some instances, it's helping to educate the Syrian families that even though the food bank is there and it's a free resource, they shouldn't go there unless they need to. And some of them have been going when they didn't need to. And so there's been some communications issues around that, but we continue to work and study that in close collaboration with the service provider organizations on food bank usage.
Thank you, Ms. Rempel. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the Minister and his officials. I'm wondering if the department has had any inquiries with respect to foreign credentialing. We have a number of Syrian refugees who are here. Many of them may not even have the transcript with them due to the rush in which when they left their country, and therefore having difficulties in accessing post-secondary education opportunities or work opportunities. So I'm wondering from that perspective if the ministry's had any inquiries with respect to that, and what action will the government take to help address that issue?
So we've started to receive inquiries now about this. The number I have is that those intending to obtain credential recognition or a license to work in a regulated occupation is, I'm trying to add quickly in my head, it's about 600. And so we'll work with provinces and territories to try and help people come through the system to address some of the problems that you have outlined. It will
and to the Minister, I think this is a major issue because some people don't even have the transcripts and they cannot make an application to post-secondary institutions or secure employment because they don't have the transcripts. So I wonder if the Minister will take some action from in his leadership role to address this issue.
Yes, I agree with you. If they have come from the difficult circumstances of being a refugee, they won't necessarily have all their papers with them. So do we have measures in place to deal with that? How is that acted upon? Currently, I'd like to know the status quo before, seeing if more needs to be done.
So two parts to, Mr. Chair, two parts to that answer. The first is, in some cases, we do competency-based assessments. So in lieu of transcripts, there are some occupations, particularly trades, where competency-based assessments are recognized around that. The second is a more complicated answer on responsibility with respect to foreign qualification recognition. So it's a responsibility of provinces and territories, and then they further subdelegate to regulatory bodies. And on the federal side, we share responsibility with our sister department, ESDC. So it's a variety of actors who need to come together around this point.
Maybe I can suggest this and ask the Minister to look into this and get back to the committee specifically as well on the question around lost transcripts, the inability for them to obtain the transcript, and how that could be addressed in a practical way for post-secondary institutions as well as the refugees. Going forward on to another...
I will do. I might just add the point that the general issue of credentials has been plaguing this country for decades, and it's largely provincial. But we are going to have a federal provincial meeting in which the provinces will all be there, and we discuss best practices on improving how we deal with credentials in general.
Thank you. I just want to move to another area, the one-year window application, the opportunity application. In that process, refugees' parents and siblings are not considered, generally speaking, as a family unit, and therefore they can't make application for them. And so I wonder whether or not the Minister can advise how that could be addressed, because there are a lot of Syrian refugees who are here who are not able to make application for their immediate family members in that context.
Okay, I think I'd hand that to Mr. Manicom.
Yes, the one-year window process is for when you have a refugee nuclear family separated at the time of the application. For let's say, for example, that the wife and children were in Lebanon and the husband was working in a Gulf state or in Europe, for example. That process enables us to process the family to which we have access immediately, bring them to Canada, give them permanent resident status without examining the other family member, and then that application can be submitted during 1 year for that person to come. The non-nuclear family sponsorship entitlements for refugees are the same as they are for other Canadian permanent residents or citizens. They can sponsor their parents under the family class. Canada does not have a sponsorship program for siblings. That said, a very large proportion of the privately sponsored refugees are through the sponsorship groups responding to the requests of refugees to bring in family members.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the answer, and I understand how the program works. I guess my point is this. There are many families, and given their culture, they actually live in these large extended families with parents and often siblings. One sibling is often responsible for the rest of the siblings, and that's the nature into which the culture that they come from. And so the way in which the system is set up with the 1 year window of opportunity excludes them from bringing those family members here, to which they consider as their nuclear family. So I would urge the government to take a look at that and perhaps come forward with revision. I want to ask on this question, how many applications has the government received through the 1 year window of opportunity, and how long would it take to process? And then in that context, are these applications included in the immigration targets from the government, in the report that was given from the government? And I wonder whether or not I could get a breakdown of the countries of what the targets are for the refugees that the government would be included in the coming year.
Yeah. I don't believe we have those statistics with us. We'd be happy to provide them to the committee. The number of 1 year window cases each year is generally known in advance as a sort of a formula from our experience. The Syrian movement, of course, is a very large one and new to us on that scale. Because we were focusing on intact families in our government-sponsored movement, we would expect the number of 1 year window cases to be relatively modest, but we could find that information out for the committee. Perhaps Dawn has something.
And I would just add, Mr. Chair, to give a sense of context, from 2011 to 2016, the department received over 1,600 one-year window applications for 2,400 people. And they're generally speaking, in this context, from African countries. So it is a program. It's part of our levels plan. We deliver on it, but it's not a very high number in terms of the number of people resettled.
15 seconds, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you. The dental services, which is covered from the federal interim program, there is a huge problem with access to procedural problem. People go and they get approval, and when they go for the appointment, they have to phone again. The dentist's office have to phone again, and they wait for another 45 minutes before they can actually do the actual work. Can the minister fix this problem?
Yes, there was a group of dentists I was supposed to meet on these issues yesterday. Something came up and I did not meet them, but I will find out what they said and try to resolve that issue you just mentioned.
Thank you,
Minister.
and if we can get a report back.
Kwan. And you will report back to the committee?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chen, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be sharing the last 2 minutes with my colleague, Ms. Zahid. Thank you very much to the Minister and to staff for appearing today. I know in my previous work at the Toronto District School Board how important it is for us to successfully integrate newcomers and provide them with the settlement services that they need. And in my riding of Scarborough North, in fact, there's a great partnership between IRCC and the Toronto District School Board to establish a newcomer services office. And I was fortunate enough to have helped launch that program as a local trustee several years ago. I know that in a report by the Centre for Refugee Studies that was published, that privately sponsored refugees are less likely to access settlement services. They are less likely to also access language training compared to government-sponsored refugees. and recognizing how important it is for us to successfully integrate all refugees into Canada, and as well that the department has allocated an additional $38 million in the 2016-17 budget year for specifically settlement services. Can you share how that money will be used to encourage all refugees, including those that are privately sponsored, to access the services that they may need?
Well, look, I'd ask one of my colleagues here to answer that question in general, but let me just make one point. I'm not surprised that the government-assisted refugees access those services more. I would hope both of them access them a lot, but the typical profile of our government-assisted refugees from Syria is that they speak not a word of English, not a word of French, so all of them will clearly need language services and other services. So I'm not surprised they request those services more than the privately sponsored, who are more of a mixed group, but perhaps one of my colleagues has a more specific answer.
I'll start and then perhaps pass my other colleagues. So we certainly would agree, sir, that we would want refugees all to be aware of the services that are available to them. And we certainly work with the private sponsorship community quite intensively. We have training programs and so forth for them to make sure that they are aware of all the services that are available to refugees. But of course, as the Minister said, privately sponsored refugees often already have family or social or cultural links to Canada. A number of them have official language skills of some sort. About 60% of the Syrian refugees self-declared as speaking some English or French, for example. So I think this would explain the rates of differential usage, while at the same time we certainly do encourage all refugees to access the settlement programs they are entitled to use.
I would just add, Mr. Chair, that under the iCare system that my colleague Ms. Tapley referred to earlier, our report from the middle of April in terms of how many Syrian refugees have come forward to seek settlement or resettlement services, and there's some double counting because they do seek several types of services. It's about 17,192 people, of which 4,062 of those were privately sponsored refugees, so just under a quarter have come forward as privately sponsored refugees. They're quite heavily privately sponsored refugees are coming forward in terms of language training, language assessment, those kinds of things.
Thank you. Minister, you mentioned that 98% of government-sponsored refugees are now in permanent housing, and I think that is an incredible accomplishment. I'm going to ask a question like a parent would ask to a child who's brought home that test and achieved 98%. What happened to the other 2%? And so my question to the minister is, do we have a profile of that remaining 2%, and what are the greatest challenges, and how can Canadians help and work together to ensure that all those government-sponsored refugees receive the housing supports that they require?
So you're quite a tough parent. You don't think 98% is a good mark? I am told that the number should be 100% within a month by mid-June. I am not sure. Perhaps my colleagues could tell you which are the places which are well below the average and where there may be more work to do. So even though we have a 98% mark, we're not satisfied. We'll find out where the weaknesses are.
Yeah, Don will answer the question, but I would just add that once you get to 98 to 99%, you have a number of very special needs cases in certain communities, and you're working through them individual case by individual case, but perhaps Don will have some actual data.
And if we could have a quick response. We're into Ms. Zaid's time now.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to give a quick response. So there's a couple of communities that aren't at 100% yet, so or at 98% yet. The one that is the lowest at the moment is Victoria, but that's only because they only started taking in folks kind of mid-February, so 3%.
Thank you. Ms. Zaid, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Before I go into my question, I just wanted to clarify one thing. It was mentioned that for 2015-2016, your department allocated $298 million for the Syrian refugees integration. 187.4 was spent by our IRCC. So that means were we underspent?
What I know for sure is that we underspent. Now, not all the numbers are necessarily all in, so I can't tell you underspent by exactly how much, but I know that we were under budget and before the deadline date, so that is good. But perhaps somebody can comment on the degree of underspending?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can. So we underspent by about $110 million between Vote 1 and Vote 10. And if I could just correct an answer that I gave earlier to Ms. Rempel, the actuals for the entire Government of Canada, I read the wrong column, it's in the neighborhood of $314 million. The variance for underspending was the number that I gave you, which is about $142 million.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Soroya, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and especially the officials. They always do a good job. Thank you. My
compliment.
My first question is for the department officials. How many persecuted Yazidis have been guaranteed permanent resident status as a part of the government Syrian refugees programs?
Yes, we are not able to identify refugees by ethnic origin. We don't have that data in our systems. We are dealing with a small number of Yazidi cases, and we know that there are some in particularly difficult circumstances in parts of the world that are extremely difficult for us to get to. But we are working on a small number of cases at this time. I don't know if Don has more details, but the number is quite small.
I believe it's 9 cases at the moment.
9 cases. Okay. There was a minister of a total 600 visa observers transferred for the Syrian files, 500 plus another 100. What did it impacted their regular jobs? How far their regular job, whatever the part in the world they were from, what impacted their regular work? How far they were delayed their regular jobs?
You mean the people who came out for the Syrian operation, how it impacted their regular jobs?
Yes.
Well, clearly they were not able to do their regular jobs, and so we had some people come out of retirement. We had some people from various departments from different parts of the world volunteer, and so they were backfilled by other people, and that's in general what happened. Perhaps someone else can give more detail on that.
So we had Foreign Service officers who were posted in overseas posts who moved into one of the 3 processing centers in Beirut or Turkey, or in Ankara or Amman. We also had Foreign Service officers who are currently posted somewhere in Canada doing work, who are not processing files, but who then went to support the effort, as well as other temporary duty officers from elsewhere in the department who have been trained to do this work, who went over to join or to backfill the other officers who had been displaced.
Actually, in my meetings with officials in different parts of the world, quite a number have come up to me and said they were so happy they were able to volunteer. So I know we've had people from New York, people from London volunteering, and somehow or other they were replaced during their period in Jordan or Lebanon.
The difference between government-sponsored and the private sponsorship. What my experience is, I attended a couple of functions with the private sponsorship program I think it's called Parsa Food in Toronto. They took Syrian private-sponsored refugees, as well as 40 of them by Goodyear, Canada, in the mechanical place. How many government-sponsored refugees have found a job? Do we have any sort of numbers?
Well, that question was asked before, and we're working very hard to help find them jobs. I, too, have been to events where employers have made many jobs available, but we don't have precise numbers. But as I think it was Katrina Tapley indicated, there are 2 sources we are developing where we will have more precise numbers to answer your question.
And if I may, Minister, the province of New Brunswick worked collaboratively with us and the service provider organizations in a really innovative way. So we moved people into a hotel in Fredericton where they started to receive settlement services. And then adult members of the families were interviewed as to what their job skills were and capacities, and then they were actually placed in communities where those jobs were available. So they're not necessarily working yet, but they're working on their language skills, and then there are job opportunities for them in different parts of New Brunswick, like Bathurst and Edmundston, that normally we wouldn't have resettled people there, but they've got good opportunities.
What is the difference between the government-sponsored refugees or the private-sponsored refugees? In my experience, private-sponsored refugees find a better job, they get settled better, it costs less. And meantime, we put a cap on it. Is there any, why did we put a cap on the private sponsors?
As in most
20
things
seconds, please.
Okay. There's always a balance. On the one hand, the privately sponsored refugees do tend to settle faster. On the other hand, the government-assisted refugees are very vulnerable people, and deliberately so. They generally speak not a word of English or French. They generally have very little education. And so we want to help the vulnerable people. In a sense, that's a good thing. But once they get here, given those demographic attributes, it tends to take longer to settle them than it does the other group.
Minister. Mr. Asasi, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister, for appearing before this committee once again. Great to hear your opening remarks and to observe and witness all the progress that has been made to date. But I did note that in your opening remarks you referred to this as the end of the beginning, and that there are certain other challenges we should be currently focusing on. So having had the benefit of looking at this whole process as a partnership between the federal government and Canadians from coast to coast to coast, or perhaps a partnership between the many provinces and the federal government, I was wondering, as we look to on the horizon at the next challenges, whether there have been any private sector companies that have come forward to offer to assist with the retraining of Syrian refugees.
Well, private sector companies have come forward in very large numbers to help in various different ways. It starts with money. I had this campaign to raise money, and from CN with its $5 million to other companies with smaller amounts, the private sector raised, I believe, over $30 million. There are also private sector companies who have come forward with jobs, and many of them have hired people. I've spoken to many companies who have either hired people already or are in the process of doing so. But you're talking about training?
On integration, training, upgrading skills, things of that nature?
Well, perhaps one of the officials could talk about the training. I know about the jobs, I know about the money, but what have the private companies done on training?
So on training in particular, we've had, I'll come back to my list of award winners and we'll start there. So in addition to Cinnarol, Highline Mushrooms out of Leamington. So in addition to hiring, they provide interpretation services, language classes, scholarship opportunities for employees' children. Prince George Hotel in Halifax, direct hiring, on-the-job language training, workplace education. So there are a number of employers who've stepped up. Those are the 3 award winners. And in addition to that, what we've created on our website, and it's been very popular, is a challenge for business in terms of corporate goodwill in hiring Syrian refugees. So we've had a number of corporations step forward in terms of either making donations to the Red Cross or to others, or to participating in the fund that's established through Community Foundations of Canada, whether that's CN or the Royal Bank of Canada, in terms of what they've been able to do. And now we're encouraging others to develop those hiring opportunities. So we're getting quite a list in terms of who's contributing, whether it's IKEA, Sun Life Financial, the 5 Canadian banks who've collectively donated $1 million. So we've developed quite a list, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. Very, very encouraging indeed. The second question I had is that, as you know, provincial and municipal governments have also assumed a role in this process, especially insofar as providing educational services is concerned. My question would be, has the federal government been approached by any level of government asking for an offset of the costs that have been borne by provinces or municipalities?
Not very much. Provincial governments have a tendency to ask federal governments for money. But I would say that the overall spirit of our provincial partners has been to each put forward the money we put forward and work together. I think we had a recent meeting of all provincial ministers and myself, and everyone commented on the positive spirit of collaboration in which we had worked. I think there may be one province who thinks it should get a little more money for something or other, but it has not flavored in a negative way our overall really positive relationship that we have developed on this refugee file.
20 seconds, Mr. Asasi.
That concludes my question.
Thank you. Ms. Rimpel.
I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Tilson. Just to Ms. Edlund, just to clarify, out of the Syrian Refugee Initiative, the government has brought in 9 Yazidis.
Sorry, no, to clarify, we are currently working on 9 cases of Yazidi families that were brought to our attention. As my colleague, Mr. Manicum, noted, we don't have a way of tracking that in our system to pull. Like, it's not a field that we track people by.
Okay,
so as cases have been brought forward to us, we've been working on seeing where they are in the process, and we have 9 cases that we're working on currently. I don't have the number of people that involves.
How many cases have been processed in total as part of the Syrian Refugee Initiative?
We've just said we don't track by.
I'm asking cases, just just regardless of ethnicity, how many cases have been processed?
So I don't have that number in terms of cases because we've been tracking things by number of persons. So for the Syrian movement to date, from November 4th to May 9th, we have just a titch over 27,000 Syrians who have been brought to Canada.
And what would the average family size be as part of one of those cases?
The privately sponsored refugee family sizes tend to be smaller, so think 4 or 5 people.
Okay.
The government-assisted refugee families are much larger, think 6, 7, 8 plus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is with both government-sponsored and privately sponsored refugees, specifically Syrian refugees, that the assistance that's provided, we'll deal with the privately sponsored one, lasts a year. There's a commitment to help people, and I'll ask you, Mr. Minister, lasts a year. Then what happens? I mean, for example, and our communities right across the country have been very generous with providing housing, providing food, providing clothing, providing all kinds of things, language trainings, et cetera, et cetera. But that commitment, as I understand, ends after a year. So what happens then? What happens, for example, Mr. Minister, if people, and I'm carrying on with the question that was asked by one of the government members, specifically about jobs. What happens if they don't have jobs?
Well, look, they come in as permanent residents on arrival, and they receive support for a number of months. For government-assisted refugees, they receive support for 1 year, you're right. But the other kinds of settlement services they receive for 39 months, just over 3 years. So not everything is 1 year. But if they don't have a job or other means of support after 1 year, they are like other Canadians in that situation. The official support for them in terms of income ends after 1 year, and after that they are in a situation like other Canadian citizens and permanent residents.
They go on social assistance.
Some of them will, yes.
Some of them will. So which makes the question that the government, one of the government members asked, very important as to what percentage of people have jobs. I mean, I expect many, if not all of them, come and they can't speak English or French. So the first thing they have to do is to learn one of those languages. And if they don't, they're going to have an awful time getting a job. So, you know, I think this issue is an important issue. We want them to become good citizens and to become a member of our society, but we want them to have jobs. So if things aren't working out, for example, in my community, they get a house could get leased. Well, the lease expires. Well, they don't have any money. Then what happens?
Okay.
So I guess that's where I'm going, Mr. Minister, is that after the 1-year period, and they don't have jobs, they don't have enough money to pay their lease or their rent or buy food, what happens?
Okay, I agree with you that those are crucial questions, and that is why I want to know how many have jobs, and that's why we don't have those numbers today, but we are working to develop those numbers. Now, I don't think you'd expect all of them to have jobs after a short period of arrival, because they need time to learn the language, as you said. And I know some employers who I think are very innovative. They've hired the refugees, but they spend half the day learning the language and half the day working in their jobs. So I think there are ways to do it. But in terms of the specific question you asked, it's what I said before. They get income support for 1 year. After that, they are in a situation just like other Canadian citizens and permanent residents.
I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Zaid, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I know it is hard for refugees with limited official language skills to find employment opportunities. In my riding of Scarborough Centre, several businesses such as Adonis Supermarket and the landscaping company 3D Exteriors provided Syrian refugees with employment opportunities despite their language opportunities. However, there are still a large number of Syrian refugees who are struggling to find sustainable employment because of their lack of official language skills. From meeting with many refugees who have moved into my riding, all of them have expressed their eagerness to begin working to help contribute to Canadian society and build a better life for their families. Is from the ministry's level, is the department doing something to help the Syrian refugees transition into the employment market?
I think that is a big chunk of what the department does. We certainly work to help them find housing, but the language training, the training on how to apply for jobs, the occupational matching that the department does, all of those things are ultimately geared towards helping them get jobs. And I do think often the getting jobs and the learning language can go together. It's not 100%, it's not black and white. Sometimes they can have jobs and for part of the time do language training as well. And that might be a better way to ease themselves into the situation. But maybe one of the officials can comment more.
If I can just pick up on your answer. So employment-related services are part of the package of services that are offered under settlement services in Canada. So understanding workplace culture, links to employers, bringing both those communities together. But in addition, we also do a number of things around community connections. So connecting newcomers to both public institutions and their communities, but also creating that network which makes it easier to find a job. We're also working actively with employers, and we've seen a number of innovative practices, and one is, I'll use an example of Leamington Greenhouses, who've hired team leads who speak Arabic so that they can then hire Syrian refugees to work on the team under them and then do the matching that the minister has talked about between on-the-job language training, but some supervision that helps to ease that transition into the labor market.
Thank you. I personally visited the Adonis supermarket in my riding, and those who had some language skills were working at the cash, but many who didn't have, they were making pita breads and working at the back. So another question, a key aspect of integration for the Syrian refugees' families is education for the children. Many Syrian children unfortunately carry serious mental scars as a result of the turmoil they have gone through. This can seriously impede a child's ability to learn and integrate successfully into Canada. What is the department doing to ensure appropriate counseling services are being offered to assist the children in this situation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the programs we have is called SWIS, or Settlement Workers in Schools. And so this is a program that we work through our service provider organizations to put in place in all regions in the country where we have a high concentration of youth immigrants in schools. And what the settlement worker does is she works with the family, not just the children who are there. And that working more directly with the children, as you know, is more a provincial responsibility. But to really talk about the importance of education, homework is key, why extracurricular activities are important, and to really help bridge that gap between what's a Canadian school culture and what are the effects or the scarring effects that you talked about in terms of where children come from. So they work with the whole group of counselors in schools and teachers in schools.
We're also working with a couple of different organizations to deliver training programs for the staff and the service provider organizations so that they can be sensitized to and more aware of symptoms or signs of mental illness or stress, and then help steer people to the right levels of services in the provinces and territories to have that worked on.
Thank you.
20 seconds.
No, I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to carry on with that, I wonder whether or not I could get the information on the budget for the SPIS program, how many workers there are, and what districts they've been allocated to, so that we can have a full understanding of how that's being worked. I understand that you probably don't have those numbers there, but we can receive that at a later time. I do want to raise this issue. Last April, many refugee families in Saskatoon waited some 3 weeks for funding. Many of them actually were in a situation where they were risking eviction. This was asked of the Minister in the House of Commons, and the Minister's response was that these are hiccups. So my question then is this: how many families has this occurred to? How long on average has these delays been? And what is the longest wait time for any one family? And has there been a case of eviction as a result of these hiccups? And what has the department done to prevent such situations from happening again?
Mr. Chair, the member is correct in terms of there were some initial hiccups on what are called startup checks that are delivered to individuals when they first arrive. And we, as soon as that was identified, we then moved immediately to put a different process in place and manually cut checks for people and had them delivered to the Resettlement Assistance Program service provider organization so they could be delivered to the families. I'm not sure we would have any statistics on delays or evictions, but we can see if there's information of that sort. I certainly have not heard any stories myself of that nature.
I have.
I remember there were, if you use the word hiccups, there were issues involving not just families facing too long a time before they got their money, but also settlement organizations. And so we did speed up the check delivery process.
I would appreciate if we can get accurate information on what's happened on the ground, because aside from Saskatoon, this has happened in Vancouver and Surrey and other places as well, and where people actually could not get their checks. And in fact, appointments were made with government officials, and they just simply didn't show up, and people were just left waiting. And so this has happened. So I wonder how deep is this problem, and if we can check into providing that information to the committee so we have a full understanding of what's happening on the ground and better to improve it next time. That would be much appreciated. I also want to ask in terms of wait lists. With respect to language, and we talked much about the importance of that, I wonder whether or not the ministry has information on the list of organizations that's received language training money. How much did they receive, and how many of those organizations provide also child support or child care for people taking English as a second language or French as a second language programs? And also if there are wait lists for these programs, and if so, how long are the wait lists and how many people are on the wait lists?
Thank you. That takes up all of your time, Ms. Kwan. Perhaps the department could provide the information that Ms. Kwan has just asked for in written form.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. Minister, thank you so much for appearing before the committee once again, and the committee will suspend for a couple of minutes to allow the minister to depart. Thank you. We'll resume. Mr. Sarai, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, the Syrian refugees now that call Canada their home have gone through some pretty traumatic experiences. I believe of the 25,000 refugees that are living now in communities across this country, a significant proportion are children. Research indicates that amongst refugee children and youth, the rates for PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder are at least 20% higher in children that are coming from these regions. Are you able to speak about the government's efforts to help address the mental health of these refugees?
As I said a little earlier, Mr. Chair, we are working now on some programming within the federal government jurisdiction to try and ensure we can help people identify the types of issues that are present. We do have the settlement workers in schools that my colleague Ms. Tapley referred to, and that would be part of their remit as well in terms of working with the children in the school system. They do some non-therapeutic counseling for those children. And we certainly did experience that. I know of an instance in our interview center in Amman, which was on a military air base, and a lot of planes coming in and out, and the children would tend to climb under the interview tables.
I see.
Bombing.
So if I may, I'll just pick up on what my colleague Ms. Edlund has said. A lot of our programming, most of our programming is focused on adults. And however, we have done some work around art therapy and different programs when we've had families together in interim housing before they've moved into permanent housing. But in terms of responsibility around health services and mental health services, a lot of that will be the provinces.
Do we have data on how many refugees have started ESL training?
Do you want me? So we have just, Don and I are both talking about trying to find the right piece of paper at the right time. So roughly 55% or more of adults have now been assessed for language training, and those who've started, it's around 20%. My figures are actually April figures. We run these on a monthly basis. And so we've seen big jumps, and we'll see another big jump again for May, and we'll actually be running the data, I think, as of yesterday. And so we'll see that second jump in, but about 20% of those are actually in language classes now.
And follow up to that, would you know how many students or children, sorry, have become students and enrolled in school? Is there any data on that, or?
I don't have data on that. I can only do that answer anecdotally, Mr. Chair. And so what we hear from service provider organizations is most children are now enrolled in schools.
And if I may ask, what are the main challenges that now your department feels are paramount or is paramount in terms of the refugees? What's the impeding? It seems like permanent housing has achieved a very high level, 97, 98%, 97 in our region, 98 overall. It looks like we're on track for them to get English language training. What would be the biggest hurdle or biggest challenge that your department has identified that the Syrian refugees in Canada still face?
So I'll start, and my colleagues will join in. So continuation of settlement services. So Mr. Chair, as the committee has identified a couple of times, we've got a couple of pockets of wait lists for language training services, and we're just trying very quickly to clear those out as fast as we can, and we've made some progress, and we're happy about that. So the first are settlement services and making sure that people have access to those, whether it's language training or whether it's community connections or employment services. And then the second bigger challenge, and it's a challenge for collectively for all actors in this, and that's employment and making sure that people have jobs.
I guess I would just only add that the longer-term employment trend, as long as mental health issues that you've identified are going to be preoccupying for this particular population, But as in some discussions earlier, a surprisingly large number of even government-assisted refugees move into employment in years 2, 3, and beyond, and begin to approach the norms of all immigrants by year 6 or 7. So that's the focus that we all have to keep our eyes on.
In Surrey Centre, I've noticed or had some complaints that a lot of people don't know how to access services, and I'm not saying it's because of a lack of services, but perhaps just knowing about what services are available to them. And research apparently shows that government-assisted refugees are more likely than privately sponsored to access settlement services. I believe 87 versus 69, as well as language training. I believe it's kind of a 50 to 42% ratio. Is there any factors that influence the uptake of settlement refugees so that we can get those that are at 87 or 69 to 100 and 100? What can the government do to encourage more uptake?
So, Mr. Chair, in the area of language training, I would say one is making sure we have a handle on the wait list situation. So we've just instituted a new way of tracking who's actually waiting on wait lists, because for BC, for example, we've got a large number, but their figures at date, some of the people are on that list since 2010, and they're on multiple wait lists, and so we're trying to clean them out. So the wait list thing. And there's also the support in terms of language training for people who need childcare, child-minding services so that they can attend services, as well as transportation services to get them to the language training. So that's one area that we're working on in terms of increasing uptake.
If I may, just to add, Mr. Chair, on the other, in terms of making sure that people understand the availability of services, one of the upsides about bringing so many people so quickly to Canada and using interim sites until permanent housing was available is we had an opportunity to really promote our settlement services and in terms of relations with the privately sponsored community to be able to do that same thing. So with the population of Syrian refugees who have come, we think we're actually optimistic in terms of the number who understand what's available to them.
Sure.
15 seconds, Mr. Surratt.
Sure. Any efforts to promote ESL as well as settlement service for women? Any way to encourage the mothers or women in this to uptake English?
Yes. It's the quick answer. And so we've had a couple of things that are successful. One is women's specific language classes, the availability of child-minding services that my colleague Ms. Edlin spoke about. The other is to promoting that in terms of our first point of contact with families, the importance of all family members learning English as part of our cultural awareness that we talk about as well.
Thank you, Ms. Tapley. Mr. Tilson, 7 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask some questions on the immigrant loan program. I understand the government has waived the loans of up to $10,000 for Syrian refugees that cover travel costs to Canada and medical examinations for the Syrian refugees. I have several questions. What is the rationale to favor Syrian refugees alone with this policy over others in a world teeming with refugees?
Yeah, the refugee loan program was not used for the Syria movement in the normal way, primarily because of the speed with which the operation was going on, and we were doing government airlifts using chartered aircraft rather than individual flights. So in that context, the government chose to cover those travel costs itself, given that the cost of chartered aircraft and military aircraft would be very high if you were charging the refugees for those costs.
I've been told that I guess the question that's been put to me: will other refugees, other than Syrian refugees, be exempted in the future in the same way that the Syrian refugees have been exempted?
Yes, I believe our minister has said that he is looking at the immigration loan program. Waiving the immigration loan program for other refugees as well would be a considerable additional cost. The interest rate charged on the loans is extremely low. Right now it is 0.75%. Government is looking at the repayment schedules, whether or not interest should be charged, maximum size of loans. We are reviewing all of those issues. Each has a cost associated with it, so that is something that's under active review at this time.
There's no question that the Syrian refugees have been exempted of up to $10,000.
The Syrian refugees who are coming under the initiative up until the end of February are exempted, I believe. That's right, Don.
Yes. Will Canadians who have come to Canada in the past under this process and who have had loans through this process, will they have those loans paid back?
Will they have those loans paid back? So I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, there's the policy, as I understand it, is there's loans for travel costs and for medical examinations. And the policy is, and I'll repeat what I said, that, if you correct me if I'm wrong, that up to $10,000 is going to be waived. And so if that's the case, and I'll repeat my last question, will other refugees from other countries be treated the same way, number one? And number two, will refugees who have come to Canada in the past and who have had to pay those expenses themselves, which is substantial, just travel costs alone, let alone medical costs, will they be reimbursed for those costs?
The government has not announced any changes to the immigration loan program with regard to other refugees or refugees who came in the past. Just to clarify, the medical costs, those are quite modest. Those are the costs for the medical examination itself. So the answer is no. There is no government announcement at this time. The immigration loans program has been in place for many decades.
Indeed, it has. Which is why people have asked me, we'd like to be, I'm talking about other refugees, have said, well, why can't we be treated the same way as the Syrian refugees? Because there are many refugees that, they go through a terrible experience, as have the Syrian refugees, but they all wanted to be treated the same way. So that's the reason why I've asked that line of questioning. But your answer is you have no plans to treat other refugees in the same way as we're treating Syrian refugees.
If I could correct it slightly, I said that the immigration loans program is under active review, but the government has not yet announced any change to it.
When do you expect the review to be finished?
I don't have a date at this time, sir.
All right. What's the costs thus far in waiving these loans to Syrian refugees?
Transportation costs.
So I believe the transportation costs up to the end of April, and that includes the actual planes themselves, the buses, the hotels, food at the airport, etc., is in the neighborhood of $55.6 million.
I didn't hear that.
$55.6 million.
And that's what the government has paid for that?
Yes, that's what we paid under our contract with the International Organization for Migration.
And do you intend to continue to pay those amounts for future Syrian refugees?
So our commitment was to Syrian refugees who were interviewed by the end of February, and those transportation costs will be paid for them as well.
Okay. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reported in April that refugee claimants were being charged outrageous amounts by immigration consultants to process their loans, or to process their claims. I don't know whether you can talk about that, but I wonder if you're able to tell us what the status of the investigation into the unscrupulous practices of some of these immigration consultants with respect to Syrian refugees is.
Mr. Chair, there's a three-pronged approach that's been undertaken in relation to that particular line of stories and other instances that have come to our attention. One is to refer the allegations and the facts to the appropriate investigating agencies within the Government of Canada. So in this instance, it's the Canada Border Services Agency. The second line of approach is to then go to the regulatory body for immigration consultants to have them review whether or not, with these allegations, there has been a breach of the Code of Professional Conduct by those immigration consultants. And the third is our own relationship with our sponsorship agreement holders and whether or not there's been any breach of the obligations they have. For example, possibly overcharging administrative fees that's not allowed under the agreement that we have with that particular organization.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson. Your time is up. Yes. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Just to carry on with the loans program, the February deadline for the end of February, when was that decided and why February?
So it was decided, I'm not even sure I was there at the time, but through the course of February, we were continuing to interview cases to make sure that we hit the goal of 25,000 people arrived by the end of February. We weren't entirely sure of the people that we were interviewing who exactly was going to be in a position to travel by the end of February, and so we continued to interview more people. There's about 2,374 people who were interviewed by the end of February who had not yet traveled at the end of February.
I see. So the primary factor is to arrive at the 25,000 number, and once you have, then whoever else is coming through down the pike will not have this benefit. Similarly, those who didn't arrive prior to November 7th would be out of luck, and they didn't actually also get the exemption as well.
So to clarify, Mr. Chair, those who were interviewed by the end of February, the 2,374, they will benefit from the waiver of the transportation loan.
Yes, thank you. So I understand what the driver is now, just all to meet the numbers, but not. Anyway, in terms of privately sponsors and the groups that have come forward, individuals or groups that's come forward, how many of them are still waiting for families to arrive? And if I could get that information with a breakdown, province by province, city by city, I would appreciate that. And if you don't have that number today, I can receive it at a later time.
We don't have that number today, but it's something we can get.
Thank you. The Swiss program that you spoke about, the staff spoke about, I wonder if I could get the information as well on when that was established and if I could get a comparison budget. So I asked for the budget and the breakdown for this year, but it would be good to actually get the comparison to previous years. And so if I could get it back to the last 5 years in terms of what that budget was and the number of workers that budget carry on a breakdown of communities. And then also to have the numbers of how many refugees came to those communities. So presumably those communities with larger refugee numbers would have a larger share, one would assume, for that funding. So if I could get those corresponding numbers, that would be appreciated as well.
Mr. Chair, we're happy to provide corresponding numbers around that, particularly on the breakdown on settlement workers and school program. Just on in terms of how we allocate funding, which I think was the second part of the question. So we're happy to provide, but we allocate funding for settlement services in 2 different ways. For our core amounts of settlement services, we use a formula in terms of where we spend money in jurisdictions as well established. In terms of spending the $38 million or so in this fiscal year for settlement services for Syrian refugees, we've targeted those to the communities in which Syrian refugees have actually settled, and we've tracked that in real time in terms of where we're spending those funds.
Great, thank you. And then I also wonder, in terms of consideration for funding, do you take into consideration too the different categories of refugees? So, for example, it was mentioned that the government sponsor versus privately sponsor, there are some differences in terms of need. And then what is that funding formula consideration? If I could have that information, that would be appreciated as well.
So with respect to the funding formula, Mr. Chair, we don't break down between privately sponsored and government-assisted refugees. We do it on not with respect to the Syrian dollars themselves, but with respect to the overall formula. We do it on a per immigrant basis on where immigrants settle, and then we overweight by a factor of 2.5 for refugees in general, but we don't break that down between a government-assisted and privately sponsored.
Okay. Well, I note in the chart that was given to us that breaks down the privately sponsored numbers per province versus privately sponsored. Overwhelmingly, in the major cities such as Vancouver, Ottawa, Toronto, we have significant numbers of government-sponsored refugees, whereas other provinces have a far larger number of privately sponsored refugees. I do believe that the needs is different. I wonder whether or not, from previous experiences, if the officials have information on what the differences are between government-sponsored refugees versus that of the privately sponsored refugees in their resettlement process. And if you can share all of that information with the committee, it will be very useful and helpful.
Mr. Chair, with respect to Syrian refugees, the largest difference will be language training, and so in terms of numbers of those who report, and again, this is self-reporting on who feels they have language training. Was right here. About 85% of government-assisted refugees report not having any English or French, whereas with privately sponsored refugees, it's close to 60% report some language abilities in either English or French.
I would argue that there's a bigger difference than just language, because the government-sponsored refugees, as the minister had identified, that they are the most vulnerable groups, and that's who's targeted. Privately sponsored is different, and so in terms of even the refugee family's own background, education levels, all of those things make a difference in terms of resettlement process and so on. The size of the family matters, so all of those factors need to be taken into consideration. And I wonder whether or not the ministry staff have done any analysis with respect to that in previous resettlement processes with refugees, and therefore have that understanding going forward with Syrian refugees and other groups.
Mr. Chair, I didn't mean to suggest for a minute that language would be the only difference. We agree, of course, on the other issues as well. What we've tracked in the past are use of our settlement services, and we can break that down between privately sponsored and government-assisted refugees in terms of who uses those services, just as we could with other categories of immigrants who come in.
Thank you.
45 seconds, please.
Thank you. I would appreciate that in any of the reports and data that the ministry officials might have from the past. I wasn't meaning to say that that was the only thing that you were suggesting is the only factor that mattered, but it really is important for us to have all that information in going forward to try and figure out what is the best thing that we need to do and how to improve the services. In terms of the family makeup as well, the size of the family, educational background, that information would be pertinent as well if we could receive that from the officials.
Do we have a commitment from the department to receive that data?
Of course, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And your time is...
Mr. Chair, as much as we have available. So with refugee populations, we're not asking for educational assessments, so our information will be imperfect, but of course we will make available to the committee what we have.
Thank you, Ms. Tapley. Ms. Zaid, 7 minutes, please.
Chair. In my riding of Scarborough Centre, the Catholic Cross Cultural Services Organization, in collaboration with IRCC, provides services through the LINK initiative to assist Syrian refugees currently in Canada, help bring their family members still abroad into Canada. We know that family reunification is a key factor in the success of the integration of the newcomers to Canada. What is the response of this program up to date, and what demand for this program does the department see going forward?
We have strong demand for LINK services. We offer, as Mr. Chair, as the member has said, LINK is our English service, CLIC is our French language service. So we see strong demand for this going forward, and we're actively monitoring where we have wait lists for language classes and trying to move funds there to be able to address those, sir.
My question was in regards to the initiative to help assist the Syrian refugees who are here to bring their family matching program and the link on that, not the link classes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
So this is the Family Links Initiative. Sorry for our misunderstanding at the table here in terms of the question, Mr. Chair. So that organization has been helping to match up Syrian families who say we have family members that we'd like to be brought to Canada, and the kind of a matching service that's been initiated. There's been, I don't have the exact numbers, but there's been several thousand people's names brought forward. And then there have been organizations that have come forward to say, as a groups of fives or whatever, who have come forward to say they would sponsor those families. We probably have more, I don't have with me today more specific numbers on how that's working. David, unless you do.
We can provide exact numbers to the committee, but at this time, under that program, we've had far more Syrian refugees identified for sponsorship than we've had organizations doing the matching. However, separate from the Family Links program, formally the private sponsorship community is engaged very actively in doing sponsorships for people with family links to Canada. So there's the general private sponsorship program and then the specific initiative. In the specific initiative, we've stopped taking in new names for matching so that the organization that's doing the matching can focus on that part of the work for the next little while. But we can provide exact numbers to the committee.
That would be really great. And my next question is in regards to housing. With a large number of government-sponsored refugees, many families were temporarily housed in hotels and other such forms of temporary housing for some period of time. And thankfully, the department was able to successfully clear this backlog. And as indicated today by the minister, 98% of the people are in the housing and thus did not have to turn to military housing to provide additional accommodation. So what lessons has the department learned that could be implemented in the unfortunate event of another mass influx of refugees?
Throughout the course of the first part of the Syrian operation, we learned several lessons and put them into play. So the original plan in bringing people to Canada was that they would stay a night or two or three in welcome hotels in Montreal and Toronto, which were the two ports of entry we were using, and then flow those people forward to their destination community fairly quickly thereafter. It turned out that with the mass influx so quickly, some of the communities like Ottawa struggled with that and so asked us to slow down. And so people were staying in our hotels longer. So then we moved to put in settlement and resettlement programming in those hotels. Then we moved into a different version in British Columbia, for example, where we did a hub and spoke model, where other communities, rather than just Vancouver, we created a new RAPSPO in Victoria, and then we resettled people in Abbotsford and Prince George and Kelowna, etc., to get folks out. And then the third thing we learned was that it was better to have people move to their province of destination if they couldn't be moved to their community immediately. So that's the New Brunswick model that I spoke about a little bit earlier, that we moved people out of the hotels in Toronto and Montreal to Fredericton. Then they started to receive resettlement and settlement counseling and assistance, some language training, trips to art museums and field trips, that kind of stuff. And then they moved from Fredericton to other communities that hadn't typically received refugees, such as Bathurst and Edmundston, Charlotte County, and the fourth one, I'm sorry, is escaping me. Woodstock. Yeah, you're from New Brunswick, you know.
And so, and just to add to Ms. Edlund's answer, the department's conducted quite an extensive lessons learned exercise. It's still ongoing. We're just completing it now with provinces and territories, with service provider organizations, and with partner departments who've been in this to make sure that we learn well from what happened.
In regards to that, about on the average, if 98% of the people have gone into permanent housing, that 2%, do you have any data? Is that because I know like the majority of the government-assisted families, they are larger family numbers, like 8, 6, 10. So is it because of the size of the family that they have not been accommodated? Because I know the apartments, usually you don't find bigger ones. Or is there any other reason specific you have found?
So there's a couple of different reasons. Family size is one. Another one is if there are disabilities amongst family members that need to be accommodated, you need to have specific types of housing for them. A third has been, in some instances, the Syrian families have been offered housing in several different locations and have decided that they didn't want to go into that housing. They didn't like it. They wanted to be in a different neighborhood, etc. So there's some more complicated cases that are this remaining 2%. That we're working on settling, but as the minister said, we're expecting from what our service provider organizations are telling us that everyone should be in permanent housing within about a month.
30 seconds, Ms. Zeid.
Okay. We have heard about the importance of different areas to the successful integration of the Syrian newcomers into Canada's society, such as language, housing, and employment. The government has taken a whole-of-government approach to the Syrian refugee crisis, but many of these areas cross jurisdiction boundaries between the provincial and the municipal. What is the department doing to ensure that all the levels of the government are working together to help them integrate?
5 seconds if possible.
We have a robust governance structure of how we work with provinces and territories to make sure that it is as seamless as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Tapley. Mr. Soroya, 7 minutes, please. Oh, sorry, 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Through you, the most asked question in the riding. I think it had something to do with the Auditor General's report. Why the CBSA, I guess, Canadian Border Security Agency, is not talking to RCMP and the immigration officials. What is the reason why they don't talk to each other? I think this is going back to the fraudulent cases of citizenship. Anybody have anything to say on this one?
We speak with the Canadian Border Services Agency at every level of our department every day.
You think the Auditor General's report is wrong? When he's saying that the number of fraudulent cases were done because, and if my memory is correct, 38 cases, they looked into 38 cases, in which cases 2 cases were spoken by the 2 agencies. 36 were not touched. Even the information was available there.
Mr. Soroya, is this within the scope of the Syrian refugees, these particular cases?
Maybe not. I can come back to this one. There was most bugged question in the writing. I thought maybe I can squeeze it in.
Thank you. If we could return to the Syrian file.
Okay. Has the department done any research on the largest resettlement cohorts over the last 15 years? What were the key findings, and did the government consider these findings when drafting their Syrian refugee resettlement program?
The short answer, Mr. Chair, is yes. So we track groups who come in through our longitudinal database in terms of how they do. We've also used both formal and informal methods in terms of evaluation around both our settlement program but also our refugee assistance programming, and to look at that. And we also took the opportunity with the, I'm going to get the name wrong, Immigration Historic Society, to talk about the lessons learned, particularly from the movement of the Vietnamese boat people earlier, but also the situation with Kosovo and with others, and what were the important lessons from those. So we looked at those things.
I would add that we did do an evaluation of the major of the large number of Iraqis that we resettled to Canada, and followed them and saw how they were doing and what kind of supports they might need, and that was part of what we factored into our plan in relation to Syria.
Thank you. Going back to the private sponsorship refugee program, how many sponsorship holders agreement were signed with Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada in order to sponsor Syrian refugees, please?
I think the number of sponsorship agreement holders that we have is somewhere in the realm of about 90. And I don't believe that we signed anyone specifically just for Syrian refugees. I could be corrected on that, and we could come back to the committee. But the sponsorship agreement holders that for the privately sponsored refugees, we worked with those as we have always worked with them throughout the course of this project.
What happens through Mr. Chair? For the private sponsor, for whatever the reason, they cannot fulfill their financial and other obligations made to the refugees they have sponsored.
So there are some instances of what we call sponsorship breakdown, where for whatever reason it's just not working out, and then we deal with those individually on a case-by-case basis and look to see what supports can be provided.
Is there any many cases like this, or just a handful of cases?
I think it's just a handful of cases.
What happens if privately sponsored refugee wants to move to a different city during the sponsorship period?
It does happen. We can't prevent them if they wish to do so. If it's a pattern of activity, it could affect our future agreement with the sponsorship agreement holder if we feel that they are part of the problem, that people are moving because they're not being given adequate support. But refugees arrive as permanent residents of Canada. If they find employment or have a family connection in another part of Canada and make that choice to effectively not use the support that the private sponsorship group wishes to give them, we can't prevent them from doing that, sir.
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. I'll leave it at the 30 second. My question is much longer than 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Soria. Mr. Tabara, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I just want to ask a question on when we first brought in the Syrian refugees back in October. what your department has experienced from October to December and from January till present. What you've some of the experiences you've seen in the first in 2015, and what you've seen now, and how that's kind of transitioned. Could you give examples of the challenges your department has encountered in tackling certain issues that you've experienced prior to 2016?
Boy, there's lots of ways I could answer that question, and so much information we could give. That will be part of the lessons learned report that will be provided later in the fall. Certainly there was a large challenge in the overseas environment and ramping up to be able to process that number of people that quickly, and working with our partners in the UNHCR to find a new way of identifying refugees to come forward as government assisted or blended, and also with the International Organization for Migration, to move that number of people that quickly. And there were many challenges along the way in the overseas environment, getting staff organized, trained, national defense officials on site to help do administrative work, as well as the medical examinations. So there's that piece. We also learned throughout the course of the operation that there could never be enough communication with all the partners that we were working with, and municipalities and provinces and territories, our service provider organizations. And as much as we communicated as much as we could, there's certainly instances where had we had more time and even less sleep than we actually had, that we would have been communicating even more, because the more information helped us all make better plans together. I don't know, David, if you want to add to that.
I don't think I would want to speak in general terms of the experience of the department. I would just say that I think that one of the reasons why the operation was successful was the most intense interdepartmental coordination effort that certainly I've ever witnessed. There was a daily call of a very large table of deputy ministers every morning at 8 a.m. for week after week after week. And although that was trying at times for all of us, I think that paid dividends in ensuring that departments are working very closely together from the start of the process to the end, the arrivals at the airport, the welcome centres, and flowing on into social supports through the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Canadian Border Services Agency, Foreign Affairs, Department of National Defence, and so forth. I think that was a lesson which, if we're doing an operation like this again, that we would replicate to some extent.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just on settlement and integration challenges, we've spoken about a number of them, but one of the early lessons learned is also the importance of some pre-arrival services to appropriately set expectations about life in Canada, and both the joys and the challenges, and the availability of integration services and other things that are there. And so, it was an early lesson learned for us on the importance of those services as well.
Those are my questions, but thank you very much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Mr. Tilson, 5 minutes.
Yes, I have two brief questions, Mr. Chairman. One is to finish off from the line of questioning I had with respect to refugee claimants being charged an outrageous amount by immigration consultants to process their claims. And I think one of your answers was, Ms. Edlin, was that the regulatory body was conducting an investigation. And I must confess, I don't understand that. That's like the Law Society investigating itself if something goes wrong. So my question is the regulatory body being investigated for lack of enforcement of its own rules?
So, Mr. Chair, if I could clarify, the regulatory body put out a press release saying that they would investigate these particular consultants, and that's very similar structure to what we have with, for example, the Law Society of Upper Canada. If there are complaints about lawyers and perhaps not fully respecting the rules of professional conduct, that's what the Law Society of Upper Canada, that's one of the things it does. The same thing with this regulatory body. If there's allegations that a consultant is not living up to his or her professional obligations, they investigate that.
I understand that, although it's become clear, unless these are bogus claims, that there were outrageous claims. There are outrageous amounts being charged. And so, therefore, one questions whether the regulatory body is indeed following its own rules. And it would appear that it's not. So if I'm correct in that assumption, is the ministry or someone, is the department or someone investigating the regulatory body?
There's no hints or allegations at the moment that the regulatory body is not doing its job. They have moved to investigate this particular set of circumstances. There's a difference between professional fees that consultants charge and what's appropriate and reasonable in a set of circumstances, and the allegations brought forward by the CBC in terms of whether or not privately sponsored refugees were being asked to self-fund their income support and give that money off to a particular organization so that the organization didn't have to do the fundraising. So that's another form of activity, if it turns out to be true, that would be inappropriate.
These people are innocent people, and they're being charged, alleged that they're being charged outrageous amounts. And I'm not familiar with the rules, but it would appear that the rules are being violated, that the rules aren't being followed by the regulatory body. However, we've probably exhausted that. I just returned. I find it strange that they're investigating themselves. I have one final question, Mr. Chairman. At the Public Safety Committee on February 18th, a CBSA official stated that most of the 21,000 refugees, this is back then, who have made it to our borders were not housed in camps. They had been living in theater for a number of years, renting apartments. So I just wanted that for precision. They were not housed in camps administered by the UNHCR. So my impression, Ms. Edlund, as a lot of television viewers that we saw, was that refugees were coming from camps. But with this statement, it appears they were not. Would you comment on that?
Yes, so it depended very much on the country that the refugees were coming from. So in a country like Turkey, for example, there are camps that are set up by the government of Turkey and that house a certain number of people, but there are many millions more in Turkey who are not in camps. In Beirut, in Lebanon, they have a policy of not creating camps, and so there are at least under the UNHCR's auspices, there are some informal places where people have been living, but by and large, people are living in rented apartments. In Jordan, there were folks that we brought to Canada out of the refugee camp. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but others who, again, were living in urban environments or rural environments and then resettled.
The statement that was made in the Public Safety Committee is perhaps they're mistaken. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there were some that we took from camps, but there were far more Syrian refugees living outside camp environments, and we brought those to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson. I'd like to thank the department officials for appearing before our committee hearing. And for the committee members, the clerk is working to confirm the witness list for Tuesday. We expect that we'll have those confirmations by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you. That concludes our meeting.